Hi, this is Scott Wilkinson, host of Home Theater Geeks. In episode 247, I chat with Brian McCarty, Sean Olive, and Bob Schulein about the recent AES conference on the future of audio entertainment technology. So stay tuned.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Home Theater Geeks is provided by CacheFly at CacheFly.com.
This is Home Theater Geeks with Scott Wilkinson, recorded March 12th, 2015. Episode 247, The Future of Audio Entertainment Technology. This episode of Home Theater Geeks is brought to you by Blue Apron. Blue Apron will send you all the ingredients to cook fresh, delicious meals with simple step-by-step instructions right to your door. See what's on the menu this week and get your first 2 meals free by going to blueapron.com/twit. That's blueapron.com/twit. Hey there, Scott Wilkinson here, the Home Theater Geek and editor of avsforum.com. This week, I've got 3 guest geeks on the show, all of whom were involved in the AES 57th International Conference on the Future of Audio Entertainment Technology. Say that 10 times fast. Anyway, it was a great show, and we're going to talk much about what we discussed. 3 days, hard to compress into 1 hour, but we'll do our best. First up is Brian McCarty, one of the co-chairs of the conference. Hey, Brian, welcome back to the show.
Hi, Scott. Good to see you, and thanks for attending the show. We enjoyed having you there as well.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It was quite the event, as we will see here very shortly. The other co-chair of the event is Sean Olive from Harman International, well-known name in acoustic research and so on. Sean, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Scott. It's good to be here.
And finally, Bob Schulein, who headed up the headphone section of the conference, but was there every step of the way and will have a lot to say today, I'm sure. Bob, welcome back to you.
Hi, Scott. Good to see you. Good to see you in California. Happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm happy to have all 3 of you guys here because we got so much ground to cover that it will take all 4 of us to do it, I think. Before we go, though, let me just make sure that everybody understands. Those who are tuned in live at live.twit.tv or logged into the chat room at irc.twit.tv can post questions for us as we go, and I will pass along as many as I can. So this was a 3-day conference on the future of audio entertainment technology. And man, I got to say, it felt to me like 3 days of drinking from a fire hose. There was so much information that it was really, really hard to keep up. And it started really early in the morning and went until late in the afternoon with barely a break. I mean, we had a lunch break. We had 1 break in the morning, 1 break in the afternoon. And the coffee, I'm sure, got consumed in mass quantities. But in any event, it was an incredible conference with so many people. And Brian, so many presenters, I really meant to say, because there were people from all over the world, really, who came in and presented on all sorts of different issues. Brian, you had something you wanted to start us off with, an idea that got promoted in the conference and repeated more than once.
Well, I mean, this was the first time, really, that the AES has done a conference on entertainment audio. And that was really the reason for the 3 days being necessary. We had a lot of catching up to do. And as you saw from the list of presenters, we really had the top people in the field from all different areas of entertainment audio. And, you know, at the end of the day, what we all try to do is really our best efforts at reproducing audio from the cinema and from other locations. This was really a key that Jean-Michel Jotte from DTS kept pointing out, that you can't once a sound mixer finishes a movie in a dubbing room and sends it off, it's never heard that way again. We do the best we can with it, but with acoustics being what they are and the different channels of distribution being what they are, it's never exactly the same. And that's unfortunately a mantra that's been widely disseminated over the last 20 years in the cinema business, and the root of a lot of our angst over the years. So we did a lot of work, especially the first day with Dr. Floyd Toole and others, to ensure that everybody was operating from the same acoustical level of knowledge, so that we could move forward then and discuss the issues on kind of the same plane.
Leveling the playing field, if you will.
Sure.
Sean, what was your overall sort of impression of the conference? And first, I suppose, what was your goal in presenting this conference? What did you hope to happen, to take away, and was it realized?
Yeah, I mean, I think the overall goal was to make people aware of what the issues are. And I think that the program was designed in a way that, the issues were presented. There was a lot of interaction, which I think was good. There were a lot of people there who, not only academics, but also people in the industry, users and practitioners. So I think from that standpoint, it was a very good start to the topic.
Bob, how about you? What was your impression of how it went? Your section was on the second day, mostly about headphones, but you were there the whole time, and I'm sure you absorbed a lot of information. What was your impression of the conference?
Well, to start with, I was always pleased to see a really packed house. We had a great venue to do things. I, coming from sort of the headphone area, was particularly interested in how the world is sort of coming to realize that headphones are a very dominant way in which people enjoy their entertainment. And beyond that simple observation, the fact that through headphones, we really have the basis to produce a wide variety of immersive audio effects. And getting that point across was one. And then furthermore, being able to show people different ways in which this can be done, all the way from live capture to using computer techniques to put sounds in various spatial locations, and to basically reinforce that point that the fancy systems that one might find in the theater sort of establish a reference or a goal. But when it gets down to it, the bulk of listening today is done with headphones.
Yeah, I heard one of the presenters, I forget who it was, said something like over 85%. Let me see if I have that note somewhere here, that over 85% of music consumption anyway. Here it is. Headphone use strongly on the rise. Over 85% of end users listen to music on headphones.
That's Frank
that was who?
To BBC.
BBC. Okay. And it makes sense because we've got all these, you got your smartphone with all your music on it. People listen on the go quite a bit. Perhaps not as much as at home, but at least part of the time people are listening on headphones. So headphones become a very important thing to think about. So we'll get into headphones a little bit later. But first of all, I wanted to also bring up another point that was made more than once, that the reference, that very often we talk about in sound audio reproduction, music and movies and so on, that we're trying to replicate or simulate reality as close as possible. A live performance is a prime example, a live concert performance or something like that. But more than one person made the point of, hey, you know what? That shouldn't be our end goal. We can actually go beyond that. we can actually do more than that. We have a greater creative space, if you will, or greater degrees of freedom than simply that. We can certainly try and do that as well, but we can also go beyond it. Brian, I think you had mentioned that became kind of a mantra as well.
Well, sure. And the palette that we have in reproduced entertainment, cinema and television, and through headphones, for example, gives us a much wider palette than you would have if you just confined yourself to thinking about reproducing reality. One of the problems with reproducing reality is much of the audience has never experienced what reality is like. A lot of people don't. A lot of people don't go to live concerts, rock concerts, or jazz concerts, or classical music. They have They have no reference for what reality is. Their reality is what they've been given over their decades that they've been alive.
Mm-hmm. Well, then that point of reference may not be, realistic for them. Realistic, sorry, but in fact, yeah, they are more people who haven't been to live concerts might have a greater appreciation or willingness to go beyond that. On the other hand, another thought comes to mind when you say that is that when you go to a rock concert or anything that has live sound reinforcement, you're not really hearing the instruments themselves. You're hearing them through a PA system. So in essence, you're listening to it through a sound reproduction system to begin with. Classical concerts are different, of course. You go to a symphony hall or a chamber music concert or something like that, and you hear the actual instruments, and that forms a very complex sound field. But when you go to an amplified concert, it's virtually the same as listening to your stereo, don't you think?
Sure. And I think Bob can talk to this a little better, because with headphones, we can provide the listener with different experiences from the same software. They can get both a live experience or a binaural experience. Bob, why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, thanks. Actually, just backing up slightly, Francis Rumsey, who spoke on the last day about spatial audio, has made a couple of points. And one is, are we striving for accuracy, or are we striving for a pleasant experience? And you can sort of go both ways with that situation. I pretty much think we're trying to go for a pleasant experience, and maybe if it's really accurate, it's even greater. But to Brian's point, if you picture the concert situation, let's call it a rock concert, that concert is a construct to allow a bunch of people to hear this group. Not necessarily the best way to hear the group, but a way for a lot of people to hear the group en masse. So if you sort of extrapolate some of the things you could do, if you had a headphone mix, for example, for the audience, you could present different perspectives of that musical performance, or you could perhaps put yourself on stage. There's the technology allows us to do a lot of interesting things that we really never thought of before.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of headphones and accurate versus pleasant, that brings up a very interesting point that we've talked about on this show before, which is what's called the headphone target curve, which, Sean, you've been working on at Harman, I know, and we actually have a graphic, sort of. I have a few graphics to show you on the show today, and they're actually photos of the PowerPoint, and this is one of them, and it shows an experiment. Sean, why don't you tell us about this?
Sure. So, yeah, the last couple of years we've been doing a lot of research on headphones, trying to figure out what people prefer, and then trying to find a measurement that can reliably predict or correlate with what people prefer. So what you see up on the screen is an experiment that Todd Welty, Beth McMullen, and myself did about a year ago, and we presented this at the the most recent AES convention in Los Angeles, 137. And this was an experiment where we had, we took an accurate speaker in a listening room, and we basically flattened it at the listening spot. And we did two experiments, one with a loudspeaker, one with a headphone. And with the flat speaker in the room, you see those two green ranges, and people could basically listen to music and adjust the bass level or the treble level within those two extreme ranges. And they did this with several programs. And the red curve represents the average final settings for the loudspeaker in the room. And the blue curve represents the headphone adjusted to the average preferred level. And you can see that they're very close with each other. They're within a couple of dB, but the red curve, it's about a 4, maybe a 6 dB bass boost that people prefer. And the headphone bass boost is about 4 dB. And if you look at the treble region, they're also within about a couple of dB. But what we're not showing here, if we superimpose the in-room response of the speaker, you would see that the red curve almost exactly fits over top of the speaker without any equalization above a kilohertz. So that tells us if you design a speaker well and it has a flat on-axis response, there's very little adjustment necessary when you're calibrating it in a room. And this also tells us that, most recordings today are made to sound good through speakers in a room, and the headphone target response has to basically emulate that accurate speaker in a room. Otherwise, recordings will sound they won't sound very natural or what the artist intended.
Mm. Speaking of target curves, that brings me to another point that was talked about at the conference on the first day quite a bit, which are acoustical issues. And Brian, as you said, Floyd Toole, who's also been on this show, talked quite a bit about acoustics in large rooms, small rooms, so on. And he focused a lot on what's called the X curve, which is another sort of target frequency curve that is used in cinema. And here is a picture of the classic X curve. And Brian, why don't you tell us a bit about what this is and how it works?
Well, the X curve has been the target curve for cinema. It's part of a SMPTE standard known as S202. It was designed originally to act as brute force noise reduction. When optical sound was being used, there was a lot of noise above 2 or 3 kilohertz, and you roll it off at high frequencies and you minimize that noise. The curve has been adapted as we moved into the digital age, but as the SMPTE B-Chain report from last October discovered, nobody's following the X curve anymore. Essentially because studios are commercial businesses and have to please their customers, which is the directors and the producers. And they've done that by moving their room impulse response much, much closer to flat than anybody had really expected before we did that report. Dr. Toole, the work that he's been doing now is basically building on the work that he and Sean and others at Harman have done over the last few years. Dr. Toole is finding that a flat speaker put into a dubbing room or a movie theater in front of the screens without the screen effects produces a room response that looks suspiciously like what the audience wants to hear on loudspeakers and headphones in their previous work. And
so in other words, kind of like that frequency response we just saw in terms of the target and in-room curves, rather frequency response curves.
Yeah, we're basically talking a target curve where the the tilt point is at about 2 kilohertz. Audiences prefer a lot of extra bass. The movie theaters are one of the few places where you can do bass to your heart's content and not annoy anybody, except sometimes the people in the next theater.
Yeah, right.
And as we've found out, people prefer a slightly reduced high frequency response, but nothing approaching what the X curve is used. So I would surmise that in the next few months, we're going to see proposals come back to the SMPTE to revise S202 to accommodate what we now know about big room and small room preferences by the audience.
Yeah,
but
Scott?
I'm sorry, yes, Bob, go ahead.
I'd like to just add a little bit to what both Sean and Brian have been saying to help people understand why these are concerns. Floyd Toole, when he was on your program some time ago, has coined a term, the circle of confusion. And this applies to both headphone listening and loudspeaker listening. And the circle is simply that when you design speakers, you listen to music that was produced on speakers, and those speakers were created listening to music. So since there's no standard, this is a sort of a vicious circle. And there is a desire in both headphone listening and loudspeaker listening to come up with a measurable, let's call it a room curve or a headphone curve, so that both producers of material and producers of headphones could make use of the same curve, so that the listener would have a better chance of enjoying what the producer created. And what makes this somewhat difficult, and particularly regarding loudspeakers, is you need some way to measure the subjective frequency response in a room. This continues to be somewhat of a question. The same thing applies to headphones, but the headphone situation is somewhat easier to deal with because the room, so to speak, is very tiny. And if you use the sound pressure at the eardrum as your reference, the work that Sean and his group did paint a pretty clear picture as to how you'd go about coming up with a reference curve. And that would be based, first of all, on a lot of people listening and saying, we like this on current music. So you pick it, and then you make it possible for others to reproduce it, so that pretty soon you eliminate this circle of confusion.
This addresses another common theme at the conference that I heard, which was how do we define reproducing the creative's intent or the mixer's intent? Because as you say, they're mixing in one system, you're listening on another system, there's no standardization. And so it may very well be that what you're talking about there, Bob, is something to address that issue of how do we know? We want to recreate the producer's intent. I sure do. I do on television. And in video, it's easy to do, relatively speaking, because there's a standard of what the white point, the grayscale point should be, and where the colors should be, and you can measure that and you can get that right, and then you can say, okay, presumably the content creators were looking at a monitor that produced color and images in this way, and I'm looking on a TV that produces it in the same way. I should be able to deduce or conclude that what I'm seeing is more or less what the content creator saw. But in the case of audio, it's not so clear cut, is it?
Right. You could, it's certainly a well-worn comment. This thing, whatever it might be, allows you to enjoy the producer or creators or the artist intent, which it's kind of a stretch. But if we sort of break it down, one element of any sound system that's quite dominant is the temporal, the frequency response. So if you can find some way to get that right, such as standardize a loudspeaker in room and headphone responses, you can deal with the tonal or the timbral aspect. assuming that the production is low distortion and doesn't have a lot of noise in it. The other big aspect would be the spatial, and that is a little more hard to pin down because now you've got to define sort of the reproduction method, be it mono, two-speaker stereo, multi-channel stereo, or headphone. All of those schemes have the potential to create different types of spatial events, but headphones have the biggest possibility, I should say. So in summary, trying to get the tonal, the timbral aspect to be reproduced in a predictable way, and the spatial contents would move you toward artist intent.
Well,
okay.
it's got the other thing you have to remember too is on the picture side, the picture isn't affected by the room. Acoustics of the space are always the biggest difficulty for sound.
Yes.
And so, of course, meeting the artist's expectations is sometimes out the window once you've set it down the line into very vastly different acoustical spaces. That's the big difference that quite often the picture people don't appreciate.
Well, I would argue, I agree with you generally, but I would argue that the room does have an effect on your visual perception as well. For example, if you're in a very dark, neutral colored room, you'll see one thing. If you're in a very brightly lit and or white wall type room, you'll see something different as well. So the room does have an effect on the visual, but I think you're right that it has more of an effect. You'll see a greater difference in the acoustical auditory effect that it has.
Right.
Right.
Utopian Emo in the chat room has a question here. Doesn't the frequency curve preference vary greatly depending on the user's listening tendencies? For example, I couldn't stand to listen to music EQ'd the way a modern teenager likes it. Sean, do you have anything to respond to there?
Sure. So the study that we did recently that came up with this target curve, we did with 238 listeners all over the world, and it included a lot of young teenagers as well. So we found no dependency or effect related to age or where the people lived or whether they even had critical listening experience. In the context of this experiment, people generally agreed that they like this Harman target curve that we came up with. So certainly your opinion will vary depending on how the music was balanced. But generally speaking, if the music's well recorded, people will agree what they prefer. So it turns out that good taste is or preference is pretty universal.
What do you know? Who would have thunk it, huh?
Yeah. Well. Speaking to Sean's point, their work was to try to find preferences. They were in full realization that there are people that have very different preferences. But once you have implemented a standards approach, those that want to listen differently are free to do so by using widely available tonal adjustment. The beauty of the standardization is that if you wish, you can go back to the reference. And some people want to do that and some don't. So this doesn't really inhibit the either the creator of headphones or the producer of content. It just gives you a better reference situation. It's very much like, Scott, your work when you calibrate television sets. You're trying to calibrate a visual image so that the producer of the content and the viewer would see the same thing. But you know full well that some viewers choose to do things different. But at least they
Boy,
could.
don't
they
I
could
know? Yeah.
Yeah, they could have the ability to go back to a reference if they wished.
Yes, that's exactly right. In fact, I'm always appalled at how many people actually prefer to look at TVs in the dynamic or vivid mode, which is far from accurate. But they say, yeah, well, I like that. I'd rather have the garish colors and the really bright picture. And so on
No,
and so forth.
We're calling that high dynamic range now, Scott.
Oh yeah. Oh right. Well, one more question about the X curve that I want to make sure we talk about a little bit about, which is the X curve. There's also an effect, and it was talked about at the conference, when you put a speaker behind a perforated screen, which is all commercial cinemas and many home theaters too. It affects the frequency response of the sound as it passes through the screen. And Floyd Toole talked about this as well. And so did, what was the woman's name? Linda
Gedimer.
Gedimer,
Yeah.
yes. Talked about this.
Yes.
And my question to you, for any of you, is how do we deal with that? Because that also rolls off the high end in particular. And maybe follows the X curve to some degree or not. Can we compensate for that if we, as Floyd Toole recommended, abandon the X curve and try to do something else? He called it, in fact, the Y curve, W-H-Y. I thought that was very clever. Let's see. Brian, why don't you start?
Yeah, that's a very good point, and it was a point that's often been raised about the X curve, and it was we've got all of the answers in hand now. Glenn Liebrugen gave a paper that discussed. Let me step back. There was a paper from Holland and Company in England where they discussed what the effects of the screen actually were on comb filtering and the reduction of high frequencies in the auditorium. And you're right, it looked very much like that shape. And in fact, we believe that's where that shape has come from, for the most part, is the high frequency reduction caused by the screen. And then Glenn Liebrugen did some testing to where he's quantified how much high frequency boost you would need to compensate for the screen. It's always been opined that would cause drivers to blow out in the theaters because of them needing to be boosted dramatically. Well, he believes the boost is about 3 dB at 10 kilohertz, which most modern drivers would handle easily. So to that point, we believe that existing theaters could abandon the X curve and suffer no consequences other than better sound. Mm-hmm. But as we move forward with new standards, my view is that the gold standard for cinema audio reproduction has got to be acoustically transparent screens.
Which perf screens are supposed to be, but
no, they're not supposed to be acoustically transparent.
Really?
They're not discussed in that way. Screens with holes that are punched in them are obviously going to limit how much high frequency energy is coming out of the loudspeaker, because the loudspeaker and the screen, and in fact, are one system at that point. Because we're measuring in the room, we're measuring the performance of both of those things.
Yeah.
But
the distance between the speaker and the screen also makes a big difference as well. Some of them are right up next to the screen, behind the screen, and some of them are, a foot or two or a meter or two back. And,
sure.
That can really change things a lot.
And some of the speakers are canted one way or the other relative to the screen, and some are trying to fire directly through the screen. There's all kinds of problems created by the screens, but we think that most of them we can ameliorate in a new standard. But, if we're going to have movie theaters that have the best possible chance of sound, they should have woven screens, which don't affect the high frequencies at all.
Yeah,
or nearly as much. Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
First of all, I think most of us listen to music through an acoustically transparent screen. It's called a grill cloth, which is often often in front of your speaker. And it's generally accepted that these devices don't really alter the sound quality. Some people like to remove them because they like the look of the bare drivers. But in the theater, the screen is trying to serve two purposes. One is to have the appropriate reflectivity for various types of movie presentations, and at the same time let the sound through. So we're living with a compromise. You don't see a theater with the speakers below the screen where you can see them like you often do with some home theaters. So to my knowledge, nobody's really solved this combination problem where the screen can be as reflective visually as it needs to be, yet be suitably acoustic transparent. So I think that's ongoing work and a difficult problem.
I agree. I agree that it is a difficult problem. Well, we got a lot more to cover here and not a whole lot more time to do it, so we'll get to as much as we can. But before we do, I would like to take a moment to thank our sponsor for this episode, which is Blue Apron. Now, we all love to eat. I know you guys all do, and I know I do, but it's hard to find a meal that doesn't compromise somewhere. Are you looking for good value, quick to prepare, healthy and delicious? Heck, I'm looking for all three. That's where Blue Apron comes in. Blue Apron makes cooking delicious meals easy and fun by delivering fresh, ready-to-cook meals right to your door. For less than $10 a meal, Blue Apron sends you fresh ingredients, perfectly proportioned, with step-by-step recipe instructions, including beautifully printed pictures, making cooking healthy meals really easy and fun. No trips to the grocery store, and no waste from unused ingredients. I think that's really cool. Blue Apron is perfect for date night, cooking with friends, and they even offer family plans with kid-friendly ingredients so your whole family can eat well and have fun preparing meals together. Each balanced meal is only 500 to 700 calories per serving, and so yummy you'd never know it. Cooking takes about half an hour, shipping is free, and the menus are always new. They don't send you the same meal twice, so you're always going to get something different and delicious. They work around your schedule and dietary preferences too, and Blue Apron's experts source only the best seasonal ingredients for incredible meals like pork dan-dan noodles with watermelon, radish, and garlic lime peanuts, and Greek sweet and sour stew with rainbow chard and fingerling potatoes. You'll cook incredible meals and be blown away by the quality and freshness. Blue Apron, it's a better way to cook. Check out this week's menu and get your first 2 meals free by going to blueapron.com/twit. That's right, 2 free meals just for going to blueapron.com/twit. And we thank Blue Apron very much for their support of Home Theater Geeks. So another really important issue at this AES conference was low frequency. And Tony Grimani was there talking about bass, as were a number of other people. And I thought it was very interesting that Tony Grimani in particular talked about the need for implementing bass management on the creation side of things. Those of us in the home theater realm know all about bass management. We typically, the receiver or preamp processor takes the low frequencies below a certain cutoff or crossover frequency and redirects it, all that energy to the subwoofer so the main speakers don't reproduce it. And there are many advantages for that, but they don't do it in theaters typically, and they don't do commercial theaters, and they don't do it in the production side of things. So who among you would like to tell us a little bit about this issue and what we might see in the future? Sean, have you got anything to say about it?
Sure. Someone's pointing at me. Yeah, well, I think Tony pointed out that a lot of the speakers used in commercial cinemas don't have very much output below 40 hertz. So that's a full octave of music or sound that you're not hearing. And the danger is, and this has happened, if you're not monitoring below 40 hertz, you can be putting a lot of stuff on the production that that you may not hear in a commercial theater, but when you get home and rent the Blu-ray or whatever, you hear all kinds of crap coming out that's not very pleasant. So, the first thing is being able to hear what you're actually putting on the master. So that's one issue. And then, of course, the other issue is there's advantages using multiple subs because all rooms have a certain set of modes. And as you move from seat to seat, the bass quality and quantity can change. So Todd Welty's done a lot of work on using multiple subwoofers to basically tame the low frequency resonances in the room, and so you get more consistent bass from seat to seat. And in a cinema, they're fairly large spaces, so the advantages there are not as great as in a home theater where it's much smaller. But he touched on that as well in dubbing stages, that using multiple subs could help reduce the variance in bass from seat to seat.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, go ahead, Brian.
Even more importantly, what we found in the SMPTE chain report was that there was a huge variation in bass response in the dubbing rooms. And, another place, because there was no standard, that everybody's doing things quite differently from dubbing room to dubbing room. So that's going to be another issue that the SMPTE is going to have to address. And I should say, by the way, the reason they co-sponsored a couple of the sessions at the 57th conference with the AES was, in fact, to get some good dialogue going to deal with these issues.
Yes, Bob here.
Yes, go ahead, Bob.
To sort of put a cap on this, what I got out of the presentation was that the know-how to create a uniform bass coverage in a room has been established. These are not black art secrets. And to both Sean and Brian's point, particularly in the production side, if you're unaware of what you have, you could be mixing bass in a hole, so to speak, and putting a lot more bass content in something that really you needed to. And then someone at the other end, if they had a properly set up bass system, would hear much more bass than was necessary. So this, again, is one of those production environment, reproduction environment situations that we know how to get right. So let's start doing it.
Let's, shall we? Another point to this discussion is that for movie soundtracks, as I understand it, the LFE channel, the low frequency effects channel, is mixed 10 dB lower than the rest, and then boosted by 10 dB in the theater. Maybe one of you can explain to me why they do that. But before you do, when they remix or remaster for the home delivery, very often they don't put in that minus 10 dB in the soundtrack, and yet this home receiver is going to boost it, and that will also result in a lot more bass and a lot, too much bass, really.
I think that's a question that could only be answered by our cousins at Dolby. These were decisions that Dolby made when we first went to Dolby Stereo, and I'll be switched if I know why we did that.
Okay. Another area of interest that I thought was great was we had a couple people talking about speech intelligibility or dialogue intelligibility, which can be a big problem. Sometimes it's on purpose. Did you guys, who of you saw Interstellar? Did you guys?
Sure.
Did you guys see that? No. And the intelligibility was terrible. And in that case, Christopher Nolan, the director, has come out and said, I did that on purpose. And I went, what? Are you kidding me?
A dangerous movie technique to take unintelligible dialogue and put it into a system where there's already unintelligible reproduction systems.
Sean, were you about to say something there?
Maybe it got better.
Well, I was just going to say maybe he did that so you have to go back and see the movie several times.
Ooh, I'm ascribing a sinister purpose to it. Okay. Anyway, sorry, go ahead, Bob.
Yeah. Lon Bender, who I've worked with, so you know that there's somewhat of a relationship on this intelligibility issue. He comes from the film industry as a sound mixer, sound designer, supervising person. He's done it all and won Academy Awards and so forth. But we were, and that was part of the paper, looking at really the difference between the home listening environment and the theater listening environment. And just to recap a couple of points, when you're in the theater, you have more of your undivided attention to the film, and it's playing at a louder level. Where at home, you're typically have a lot more disturbance going on. You're playing at lower levels. So you are putting yourself in a poor position to understand dialogue. And being somewhat hard of hearing myself, I don't appreciate, I should say, this very much. But as I talk to more and more people, this is not just an issue of people that are hard of hearing. This is just mixing things for the wrong environment. So I think the industry, motion picture industry, can make a lot more happy listeners by doing a remix based on the home environment, where the dialogue and the music don't get in the way of the effects and the music don't get in the way of the dialogue as much as they do. And this can make a big difference. And Scott, you were at the event and you heard an example of how this could be done. So this is a big issue that could easily create a better environment for the home listener.
Yeah. Brian, I couldn't find the name of the guy who proposed this one solution that I thought was pretty interesting. And he played a demo, a clip from the Thomas Crown Affair, Pierce Brosnan, 1980s, I guess. He's in a glider with the female co-star. I forget who it was. And they showed it first as it would normally be played, and then with this enhancement, which he called hip flicks.
Right. That was Lon Bender.
Oh, that was Lon Bender. Okay.
Yeah.
Who's in fact been on my show as well.
Right. Yeah.
You'll have to go back and watch it.
Yeah, I have to go back and watch his show again, I guess. Yeah. But he was using compression, limiting, and EQ to carve out a clearer window, as he put it, for the dialogue. And by golly, the second clip that had the enhancement, the dialogue came through much better. Now, it lowered the effects, the level of the effects and the music. And he said it has to be done manually, but it really did make a big improvement. The other thing that somebody said would make a big improvement is using spatial audio, 3D audio, to move things away from the center of the speaker where most of the dialogue happens. And it was shown pretty clearly that if you have sound sources coming at you from different directions, they don't mask the dialogue as much as if everything's coming at you from the same direction.
Sure.
That's correct. I'm sorry.
Oh,
sorry, Bob, go ahead.
Yeah. Well,
Bob first, then Brian.
This leads you to a couple of things. In the military, when you're a fighter pilot and you are having to monitor a number of things while you're flying, it's been established for some time that if the various annunciators that are going to warn you of things come from different positions in space, because you can identify them clear, they don't overlap on each other. Similarly, when you're getting into entertainment, if you have spatial audio that ends up putting everything on top of each other, it is more confusing than if you can spread it out. And that's really one of the techniques that I've been talking more on these days, which is how do you make spatial audio more interesting and appealing? So these things kind of relate to each other. It's easier to detect the spatial elements when they're spread out, whether it be for enjoyment or for intelligibility.
Mm-hmm. Bob, you had something to say? I'm sorry, Brian.
No,
Brian,
that was
my mistake.
No.
That was you.
No, Bob's made the point. That's fine.
Okay, very good. Then quickly, a related topic that was addressed on day 2 was loudness, and this is a particular soapbox of mine. When I go to the movies, I always measure the levels, and it seems that that they're very loud, and apparently there's a recommended practice on measurement of soundtracks, which is not so obvious and easy to do. Underway at AES, Brian. You had put that in some of your concluding notes that you sent to me.
Sure. And the Europeans, who are quite often ahead legally on some of these issues, a couple of our European members of the AES who have also worked on the loudness issue for television in Europe, identified this as a problem. Belgium, Holland, and France in particular have legislation that they've implemented now that it's kind of just basically says turn the movie down, don't play it at the reference level anymore. Well, that's not a good solution. For one thing, a lot of the movies are recorded just fine and should be played back at reference level. So you're kind of tarring everybody with the same brush. So using the EBU system that's already in place for measurement of television commercials, but adjusting the algorithm for longer form audio like movies, we are well on our way to developing first a measurement technique so that everybody can identify how loud a given movie is. You know, the Dr. Sadeloff, who of course spoke remotely from for the conference, has talked a lot about loudness in really two situations. One is in the cinema for the patrons. There doesn't seem to be a lot of evidence that excessively loud movies are hurting anybody in the theaters. But we also have to remember these movies are mixed in dubbing rooms by sound mixers who work 12, 14 hours a day quite often. And at those reference levels. Absolutely. Everybody can be damaging over those timescales. Well, you would think so. But the getting the industry to look at this kind of in an impassioned way is not been easy to this point. And we're hoping that at least the discussion we had about loudness at the conference will spur some discussion internally in Hollywood, so that we're protecting people's careers and what they do after they've stopped making movies. Well, I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today. I want to thank my guests, Brian McCarty, one of the co-chairs of the conference, Sean Olive, the other co-chair, who you can find at harmon.com, also at his blog site, seanolive.com, and he writes a great blog, so I do highly recommend it, and Bob Schulein, who is at immersav.com. That's immersav.com, where you can read all about his binaural headphone and recording work and all that good stuff. You can find me at avsforum.com. You can email me at scott@twit.tv, and you can follow me on Twitter at htgeekscott and also at avsforum. And you can find previous episodes of Home Theater Geeks right here on twit.tv/htg and on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/twit Home Theater Geeks. Now, don't forget, the show now begins at 2 p.m. Pacific time on Thursdays, same day as before, just 1/2 hour earlier than we have been running for a while. So if you want to tune in live at live.twit.tv, be sure to notate that we start a half an hour early now at 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Next week, my guest geek is scheduled to be Yoel Zanger, CEO of Giraffic,
an Israeli company with a really interesting technology that dramatically reduces the buffering and interruptions that are common in video streaming entirely from the user's end of the chain. Nothing to do with the service provider, nothing to do with the intermediate channels or distribution. It's all at the user's end. And how the heck they do that is something you will learn next week. It's really interesting. So I hope you will join me. Until then, geek out.